Thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled to introduce you in a few moments to our guest today. But I just kind of want to remind you guys what our program is all about. So, the Define Yourself show is really kind of in alignment with the motto that I have for the Sidell method. And that is don't find yourself, define yourself, and go beyond. It's a show about people who have a story to share, and it's about transformation, whether in business, career, or personal. And because we are human and bring our whole selves to work, I enjoy speaking with people who have experienced transformation. This is so that I can learn more about their journey and become inspired. And our guest is definitely going to be doing that and fitting the bill today. But also because I want to remind everyone and myself that when we define ourselves, it's really about a call to action. It's about how each of us can think deeply about what we value and about building our character to add value to others and to go beyond. And at this point, am so excited to be able to introduce Beth Jones to everybody. And Beth, let me do kind of a little quick bio here and we'll get into the conversation. But Beth's passion for helping others who are survivors of trauma and abuse and to walk their healing pathways has led her to write a very forthcoming book, like literally weeks away here. Becoming an Empowered Survivor, You Too Can Heal from Trauma and Abuse. This book, along with the creation of the Empowered Survivors community, has been a beacon of inspiration for many. And as a speaker, her message to her audiences follows the title of her book, You Too Can Heal, where HEAL is an acronym: Hope, Evolve, and Love. Audiences feel the joy that she radiates as she is a testament to the power of healing. She's walked this path. Really so excited that she's here and can kind of share, that learning with the rest of us. And for some, she will maybe spark the beginning of their transformation. So with very deep Texan roots, which is kind of dear to my heart right now. Both my daughters are in Texas. Anyway, so I might say y'all at some point today, but Beth is a citizen of the world, having grown up in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. She has a tremendously amazing and interesting career, over 30 years in professional services, primarily in Dallas, Texas, and was punctuated by world travels, providing forensic accounting and fact-finding expertise to companies investing complex fraud and white-collar crime schemes. So I mean, I feel like I'm in a movie here. Through her international experience, she has a global perspective and a very deep understanding of human suffering. And she currently resides in Texas. So thank you so much for being here, Beth.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig in because talk about transformation.
Yeah, all about that.
So perhaps you might want to get everybody up to speed a little bit about, your story about becoming an empowered survivor.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. That story is about transformation for me. So becoming an empowered survivor is personal transformation, but along with that, I've also experienced professional transformation as part of the discovery work that I did to understand my life's purpose and move in the direction that the universe, my higher power, wants me to move in. That's where the professional transformation has come in. So I, about 4 years ago, had the opportunity to step onto my healing pathway. So I had a life-altering event that I went through, which I've come to learn as I talk to people, is when you have the opportunity to heal, as I've been given the opportunity, sometimes it comes with some sort of a significant event that happens. And that happened to me. Mine happened to be a hypnotherapy session, which I don't think means anything one way or the other than that's just the therapy modality that I went into that began this process for me. And I have to say about that, I'd been, trying to heal, I know now, for probably 25 or more years before I had this particular event happen to me. But as I mentioned, this was the gateway. This is where I stepped on the really intense and focused part of my healing journey, which I spent about a year going through. And that's where I underwent significant personal transformation. Again, a lot of deep self-discovery that went along with that to understand who I really am, and to shed masks that I wore that covered up the person who I really am. Part of that about gaining my freedom to be me, to be authentically me and who I am. And I had, taken on masks that other people or, even society tells us that we should wear, right? I mean, I defined myself as a wife for many years. I don't do that anymore. I defined myself as a forensic accountant and a consultant, and the title that I carried, I did that for a long time. I don't do that anymore, right? So there were things, a lot of things about me that changed as I transformed and became who I am. What I understand about my life's purpose now, and that's what's led to the professional transformation, is that my life's purpose for 50 years was to live as a victim of various trauma and abuse. To be a victim of various trauma and abuse, and to live as a survivor. And many times, a lot of ways that I was living for many of those years weren't great. What I call my unhealthy survivorship in many ways. And I've had to do the work to understand that and do the work to overcome it, do the work to have grace for and acceptance of myself and who I was. And now my true life's purpose is to take all of that, all of my experiences, that I've been through, including this amazing healing journey that I've been on, and now give that to the world. And that's what I do now. So my professional transformation has led me to where I am now, what I call myself an empowered survivor, but really to be a healing mentor and to spread my message to other survivors of trauma and abuse that you too can heal. And I am a living testament of being able to do that. And that's really what I'm hoping to encourage and inspire other survivors to do.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than having walked that road and seeing transformation in yourself. Like, the wounded healer heals himself and then helps and heals other people. So thank you for that.
By the way, I am the wounded healer. that is part of who I am.
I'm sure there's an archetype somewhere for that one.
Yes,
so let's transition, to this next question.
Sure.
So you did talk about a little bit, about kind of where you are now, but kind of take us through in whichever way you think is the best way to kind of bring us up to speed about these key transition points. Especially, maybe the event, to a certain extent, like you said, it was hypnotherapy, but like, what was the big kind of aha?
Yeah.
Young calls it, the shadow work,
Yes.
digging really deep into our own psyches to figure out like who we are and how do we kind of get to that other side.
Yeah, I mentioned just a moment ago that before the hypnotherapy, I'd been trying for probably 25 years, maybe longer, to heal. I'd been through a number of different therapies at that point in time. And so I had like this innate pull inside of me that I needed therapy, I needed help, but I had no idea why. And so I would go into various forms of therapy, including with counselors and in a therapist's office, and even engaging with some therapy modalities that are designed to help trauma victims. And I've had successful use of those more recently with my trauma therapist. But in the past, I didn't have any vocabulary or even really conscious awareness of what had happened to me as a victim, or appreciation for the severity of some of the things that had happened to me. And, I tell people that, the healing process for me has been a journey. And I understand what my purpose is, having had to have lived my life like that for 50 years to do the work that I do now. But I was also going through a healing process. And I think that was God leading me down the path of sort of trying to give me some idea that something probably wasn't quite right. About 15 years before the hypnotherapy, I had 3 significant events that happened all within a few weeks of each other, but they lived completely separate in my mind for 15 years. So the first one of those is that my aunt, so I was sexually abused by my grandfather when I was 5 years old. That was the first trauma and abuse that I experienced. And 15 years before the hypnotherapy, my aunt on that same side of the family told her daughters about her experience with the same individual. It would have been her father. A couple of weeks later, I had my first full memory of being the day that I was abused by him, that event, which is one of the only really vivid memories that I have in my mind even today. And within a few weeks of that, I started having this recurring nightmare that I had for 15 years. And I never understood the nightmare. was in a house, and over time the house was dying, rotten and infested, and over time it was rotting more and dying more and more infested. I never had any idea what that nightmare was about. In the hypnotherapy, so all three of those events lived independently in my mind. I didn't put them together to start to tell me a story about myself. Even the memory I had about my own experience with him. But the hypnotherapy brought all that together, and it was time for that subconscious awareness to come to forefront to my conscious awareness. And that's what the hypnotherapy did for me. It brought all of that together, and brought it to the forefront of my mind of, oh, that's what this means. That I experienced that too from him, and it's serious, right? It was time for me to realize how serious it actually was, and to start to see the impact that it had on my life, how I lived my life since then as a survivor. That was a profound moment. This was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever been through, the hypnotherapy itself. But one of the most, it is the life-altering event that I tell people. I walked into the hypnotherapy room as one person, and I walked out as another person. So the me that walked in died, and the me that I am now, who I became, empowered survivor, that's who walked out. And that when I awoke, so not only the awareness, oh, that's those three events are linked together, and I understand now, I understand the nightmare, but I also recognized the fact that I didn't know who I was because I hadn't accepted any of this about me, and I didn't recognize it. I didn't really have it consciously in my mind. And that was a scary moment, because I realized that I didn't actually know who I was. And if I didn't know who I was, then how can anybody else know who I was? And I began to realize that I started to see the masks that I was wearing. And that was actually a terrifying place to be, to wake up at 50 and go, wow, I have no idea who I am, right? I mean, that was scary. And I say that, so that's the event that happened. And the interesting thing about it, I was 30 years, I was almost 30 years into my career. I was 30 years into my career at that point in time. And I had been the forensic accountant that you mentioned in my bio for 20 years. I'd been a financial statement auditor for 10 years before that. So I'm an accountant. I'm a CPA by training. And I'd had this really amazing experience professionally in terms of the work that I was doing, particularly the forensic accounting work, where I really thrived. I loved that work. I was really good at what I did. And I understand why. And I was fortunate in my career to work on some really amazing projects and to work with some really fantastic people in the organization that I worked for, organizations I worked for, but also the colleagues and the people that I worked with throughout my career. I was really fortunate in that light. That's juxtaposed against my personal life, which was really challenging and difficult for all of those years because of this underlying current of you're trying to be somebody who maybe you really aren't, or you're not really accepting who you actually are. It's not in your awareness. And I was, for all those 30 years I was working, I was also married, and my that part of my life was challenging and difficult. It was busy. It was chaotic all the time. My ex-husband is also a survivor, and together we really just left life, the reality of life, by just creating this world that was very, very busy and very, very chaotic. Right? So, the professional side of me, what I used to do, I used the word yesterday. I told somebody yesterday it gave me buoyancy. And I think that was a great word that came from me. It sort of helped me to float in my life and to float through my life in an okay place, because I actually had fulfillment from the work that I was doing, which was good.
I have a question on the other side, so give me a
Sure.
second. When we were preparing and I read your chapter, there was something about your story, and I'm just going to share just a teeny bit of my story because it seems to resonate. But you know you best, and I know me best. Although I do want to say that I think everybody is trying to figure out who they are. Know thyself in philosophy is a statement for a purpose.
Yes.
And so that's why, of course, God forbid people have, what you've gone through. I'm sure there are lots of them, but
Yes.
The bottom line is what you're going through is super accessible to all of us. But here's this theory that I have. And when I myself was going through some, nothing like you, but some rough times, I realized that I would cope in certain ways that I'm wondering if that was true for you. And when you think about your career and the forensic counting, like it's very clear what is right and what is wrong, zeros and ones. And I'm just curious, does was there a certain amount of coping because the space you were in was so like specific and technical and logical? I just throw that out for food for thought.
Yes, and the answer to that is yes. There was a certain amount of coping, and I've actually thought about this quite a lot. And I look at the progression of my career, and as my home life got more chaotic, my professional life was taking me on the road more and more. The first 10 years of my life before it started getting really chaotic in my career and in my marriage that were running parallel pretty much. I didn't travel that much, but I didn't need to because there wasn't that chaos in my life. And then the chaos started to go insane and I started to travel. So first it was domestically. And that's when when I was an auditor, I did a lot of my work in Dallas for companies in and around Dallas. And so I was mostly based here. When I got into forensic accounting, I was doing investigations that were all over the country. And then eventually they went all over the world. And so I've watched that progression of being the first 10 years in Dallas, not a lot of chaos. Chaos is ramping up, and so is my travel. And each one of those trips meant that I was gone more and more. And along with that, there were things that were going on, like, I don't have any children. And so I went through a period of time when people would automatically assume that I was the person to travel because I didn't have that responsibility at home. It was a horrible assumption that people had and very unfair, but I sort of bought into it. And I think a lot of that, to be honest, and I've thought about this, was me in flight mode, right? So we talk about the four F responses or types for people who are trauma and abuse survivors, and it's fight, flight, which most of you have probably heard of. Some of you have heard of freeze, which is the third, and there's a fourth, fawn. I'm a freeze fawn combination. That's predominantly what I am, but I do see elements of fight and flight in my behaviors. And certainly getting on the road and traveling where I was now away from that chaotic environment for some periods of time, definitely me in flight mode. And I'll even, carry it further than that. I had an opportunity in 2016, I moved to Hong Kong and joined with the company I was with. I joined our practice in Asia, and I was there for almost 6 years. And looking back on that, that was definitely me in flight mode. And I was at the point where I was really ready to be done with the chaos of my personal life. And a step forward in me getting to this healing pathway that I stepped onto, because all of that happened to me in Hong Kong, my healing journey. And so I had to be there for everything that happened to me. Is that the details of that story are finer details, but it all had to happen for me in Hong Kong. But I was definitely in flight mode when I moved to Hong Kong, for sure. Because I left this life basically and said I'm gone, and sort of put it in my ex-husband's hand to take care of, right or wrong. But that was me in flight. So definitely part of coping.
I'm curious then, because you went from that mode. I mean, I'm sure there's so much you could explain, but help us understand, even just at a little bit, 50,000 foot view, how you went from that kind of coping mode and then this awareness, and then now you have your heal framework and kind of what that means to you.
Yeah. So, so the HEAL framework, that to me, HEAL is an acronym for me that is to hope, evolve, and love, HEAL. And all of those for me are action words. The evolve part of it, there's a huge self-discovery aspect of evolving as a being. And so there are two major parts to evolve in action for me. And one is about taking a holistic approach to your healing process. So it's about the tools and making sure that you're using the healing tools that are available to all of us in the right way for you, uniquely to you, because each one of us has to go through that in a very unique way. Right? But the other part of evolving is deep self-discovery to understand who you are, right? And so, through that process for me, I've come to a place where I have immense grace for and acceptance of myself as a victim and as a survivor, even the unhealthy ways in which I survived in my life, which there were a number of them, some default coping mechanisms that I still deal with. I look back during those years. And, I was sort of subconsciously aware of some of this stuff. And there's, an interesting thing about me, just a bit of a fine detail. So there are words and language around survivorship that very smart people who study people like me, survivors, write about, right? They're doing it to help educate us. And right when I stepped on that healing pathway for me, I had this insatiable thirst for knowledge to understand myself as a survivor. And I found words to describe concepts that I could only engage in conversations conceptually about things about me. So a great example of that is dissociation. So I suffer from dissociative amnesia. And I think for me, it's just not recording. So when I'm in a traumatic or abusive situation, I just stop recording. I have the emotions, I hold the emotion of how I felt, but I can't repeat to somebody exactly the events of what happened to create those emotions. I just don't record the details. And I could describe that in the past and engage in a discussion with you about that in the past around memory. And so I would engage in this discussion with you to really probe and understand, how is your brain working? I really was intrigued by this. And I could talk about how my brain wasn't working. That didn't happen. What you're describing doesn't happen for me, but it was in this curious way trying to understand it. And then, I probably did that for 15 years. And then fast forward, I now have this beautiful word, dissociative amnesia. I'm like, oh, wow, that's me, right? So that self-discovery, that deep self-discovery within the way that I define heal is really a lot of what helped to see all of these things about myself and understand myself as a survivor, and created the grace for and acceptance of myself as that being and what my life has been.
Wow. Gosh, there's so many ways we could go with this. This is so deep. It's so funny though. What I'm struck by is that, and just FYI, I might be having some technical difficulties. We might finish and then we'll have to restart it.
Okay.